everyone to our first Women Build Power Talk. My name is Ashley Berg, Director of Corporate Relations here at Habitat Wake, and I am so excited to be joined by three amazing women that are part of the Habitat Wake family and cannot wait to get started with this discussion with you all. Before we get started, just wanted to share a couple of quick updates. As you know, currently Habitat we are not hosting volunteers out on our build sites. We miss the volunteers very much. We can't wait to have you back, but our work is still as important as ever. And so if you have any interest in getting connected with us and supporting Habitat through the end of this year, please visit our website at www.habitatwake.org. I'd also like to share a sincere thanks to this year's Women Build sponsors, Credit Suisse, Duke Raleigh Hospital, the Ivy Community Foundation, CK Creations, and Bay 6. Thank you so much for everything that you all do for Habitat Wake's mission and for our families. You truly help us build home, community, and hope. Now I'd like to introduce our three panelists today, and I'm actually going to let them talk a little bit about themselves because there is no way that I could introduce them and keep it under an hour because these women are so amazing. So first, I would like to introduce Cheryl Gould, who is our Vice President of Human Resources and Homeownership Services at Habitat Wake. Cheryl, why don't you share a little bit about yourself?
Hey, good afternoon, and thank you so much for the invitation. I'm excited for our conversation today. So again, I am Cheryl Gould. I've been with Habitat Wake since April of this year. So a fairly newcomer to the nonprofit space. I've been in human resources for 25 years. I am fortunate to work in a space that I truly enjoy, and it feels like a personal calling of mine, so I enjoy what I do. And so 25 years experience. I've been with Habitat for 8 months. I get an opportunity to lead the HR space as well as our homeowner services that's responsible for working with our applicants and moving them through the application process to homeownership. So very fulfilled in that. Prior to working with Habitat, I've worked in a number of different for-profit spaces, from logistics to hospitality to building supplies. So just glad to be here and grateful for the discussion today.
Thank you so much for joining us, Cheryl. You're such a great addition to the Habitat Wake team, and we are so excited to have you on board. You joined us in the middle of a pandemic, which is, I'm sure, challenging enough as it is, and you've done an amazing job, and we're just so grateful to have you. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Next, I'd like to introduce our Director of Construction, Ms. Jessie Elmore. Jessie has been with Habitat for a number of years, and I love to tell people that she is our Director of Construction because I think a lot of people are very surprised to hear that. So Jessie, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Ashley, and so great to have everybody joining us on here today. I'm originally from actually the western part of the state, a little town called Roaring River, probably nobody's ever heard of, but it's out by like Wilkesboro area. But I came to Raleigh to go to NC State, go Wolfpack, majored in zoology there and wound up in construction. Fast forward. I got into this construction here with Habitat Wake through the AmeriCorps program. If you're not familiar with that, it's kind of like the domestic Peace Corps. You essentially serve with a nonprofit somewhere domestically, somewhere in the country. Habitat is a huge partner with the AmeriCorps program, so get a lot of young people from all across the country kind of going to different Habitat affiliates, doing a year of service basically is what you do. I love my year of service here with Habitat Wake. Did the 1 year and then decided to do 2 years. Had the opportunity to do that. And then after my 2 years of service, I was actually fortunate enough to get a position here on staff as a superintendent, which I did for about 3 years. I was out in the field, continuing to learn, my construction skills. So learn how to build the house, led volunteers, all that good stuff, made those connections with the homeowners. That was so wonderful, and really, ran the projects. And then I moved up from there to manager and now director. So now I'm managing a team that does all of those things. And I love it. Yeah, I definitely caught that Habitat bug and have not looked back, have not thought about going back and using my major in any type of way. But it's been really great. And just kind of like what Cheryl said, we have a very unique team here at Habitat Wake, and you just feel right at home once you're here. So I've enjoyed it.
Well, thank you so much, Jessie. We're so excited to have you today and so excited to hear from you. And I just, both you and Cheryl inspire me daily in the work that I do here at Habitat on my end. And I am sure that our homeowners and our volunteers and our construction staff and our AmeriCorps are inspired by you both out on the build sites as they go through their process. So thank you for all of the energy you bring to your roles here at Habitat. And finally, last but not least, I'd like to introduce Beth Jones. Beth is a partner at Womble Dickinson here in Raleigh, but most importantly, she is also a member of our board of directors here at Habitat Wake. Beth, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Thanks, Ashley. I'm glad to be here as well today. I grew up here in Raleigh. I am the managing partner of the Triangle offices of Womble Dickinson. I have volunteered with a variety of housing organizations wherever I've lived in North Carolina, and that includes doing Women Build and here with Habitat Wake. And I want to make it clear that Jessie was the site supervisor for the builds that I've been on before. I hope she cannot remember that, because that would mean I stuck out as a sore thumb. She was terrific. I think actually it was first when she was with AmeriCorps and working with Habitat. I joined the board here at Habitat Wake just this year, a few months ago, and I'm really honored to have the opportunity and privilege to serve. Habitat is a terrific organization, and I am excited to try to contribute. So glad to be here today.
Thank you so much, Beth. I love when these stories come full circle, when we have folks that have connected with Jessie when she first started or in her early Habitat years. I feel like this comes up often. We had a home dedication with Chuck Purvis, who, as you know, is the CEO of Coastal Credit Union. And Chuck immediately looked at Jessie. He was like, is that Jessie? Is that Jessie? She was the super on my build site. So, when we say that Habitat is a family, I think that these are the kinds of stories and connections and memories that we make that last a lifetime. So it's really wonderful to have all three of you together in this space to have this conversation. And thank you again for your time. Let's get started. So one of the things that as we talk about Women Build, especially both on the build site, but also as we talk, among each other, is this idea of, empowering women out on the build site to really lean into their leadership qualities, really kind of lean further into their confidence. I know for one that I have zero confidence on the build site, and am very lucky that I have a colleague in Jessie who is very kind and supportive and cheering me on as I took forever to nail in my first handful of nails, and still do. It's not my forte, guys, but I think that there is something to be said about the leadership qualities that we all have as women, but also something that I think collectively we might struggle with as women when we are perhaps looking to step into a leadership role, or if we are in a leadership role. So one of the things that I would love to chat with you all about and understand kind of your perspective is, what would you say are most of the qualities that tend to be traditionally feminine, or alternatively traditionally masculine, or gender neutral? Are there certain things that collectively, just as humans, we all have as leadership strengths, and are there some things that some genders might have, more of those qualities than others? Jessie, we'll get started with you.
Okay, sure. Yeah, great question, Ashley. I think that historically, I think that men can definitely be a little bit more assertive, and also, especially in construction, because this has been a male-dominated industry for so long, already kind of walk into it with having that confidence. And that comes from their peers looking at them in a certain way and already assuming that, oh, I see a male on the job site, he clearly is the one to go to for this project. Even if I'm standing right there sometimes and I am leading the project, get walked right past. And that's just kind of the norm in this industry. I think that it is starting to change. And I think that the more that, we as females take leadership roles, This definitely will continue to change, which is good. And I was reading an article in the Harvard Business Review, and I only read it so I could say that in here and sound really professional. But it was interesting though, because it was talking about those leadership qualities of men and women, and how a man and a woman could have the same credentials, and both have shortcomings when it comes to a promotion in a job, but because the man is maybe potentially more confident or more assertive, he would go for that job, as opposed to a woman who might say, I don't really have that confidence in myself quite yet. Maybe I need a couple more years of experience and then I'll go for it. And potentially that's why men get into those leadership roles, simply because females maybe not asserting herself as much, even though they are just as competent, potentially, or most of the time, more competent, in my opinion. So yeah, I thought that was definitely kind of interesting to think about, is that confidence can be a factor, particularly in construction.
Well, you bring up a great point. And actually, Cheryl, given your background and experience in HR, I'm curious to know, do you see that on that side of the table, where there are a large number of men that will apply for positions that perhaps maybe are not as, they're not 100% qualified, they're not 80% qualified, but they're applying, versus, women who only will apply if they are 99.9% qualified for the role. Do you see that on your side of things?
Yes, I do. I think, to Jessie's point, I think that leadership qualities can be the same for men and women. I think how they're displayed is where we see the differences. And so when I think about the different leadership disposition between women and men, there are some differences. Whereas, a man tends to be, because I don't want to say all men, I don't want to say all women, but I do think that what you see mostly in men is that they will just go for it. And so they don't nitpick it to death or overanalyze whether or not they're qualified or whether they can do the job. They will just throw their hat in the ring and then let the chips fall where they may, right? Because they have confidence that even if they don't have that skill, that they can learn it. And so I think for women, what I've seen a lot is that we tend to really overanalyze it. And so we limit ourselves because we are reading verbatim what the job description entails, and then we are then vetting that against what we currently know. And then, when we do that, there may be some skills that we have that maybe we just really haven't thought a great deal about. Maybe there can be some experiences that we've had that may have some parallels there that may cause us to be qualified. We just don't think, we overanalyze our shortcomings, but we don't give ourselves enough credit in terms of really being able to learn new skills. But I think those are the differences that I've seen.
That sounds pretty accurate. I would say that definitely in my experience professionally, applying for roles, over the course of my career, I have always felt very, very self-conscious about applying for something that I, was not 100% qualified for, which is kind of silly because you're looking at something, it's unlikely that you're going to hire somebody who has done 100% of the things on that job description, but you work with the skills and the qualities and the experience that they have to help them grow into that role. So it is interesting that our male colleagues and peers tend to just swing for the fences, as one would say, and have no concerns there. Beth, what about you? Do you see that in your industry? I would assume that you probably see a lot of alphas in the world that you work in.
Yes, without regard to gender, in fact. Yeah, just building on something that Cheryl and Jessie said, I often think of it a little bit less based on gender and more on experiences that have led to having the confidence to move forward and take a chance, or what's perceived as a chance. And that's one of the things that I actually really like about Women Build, because when we've participated, we have traditionally had, from my offices, women only. We've invited women only to participate. And so many of them, I was the child of an engineer who I was taught a lot about hammering and nailing and all of these sorts of things, an NC State grad, Jessie. And so I was confident about some of those things, but so many people had not had the opportunity to participate. And, part of being a good leader is realizing you can learn. And part of the way I learn well is through having a chance, right? An opportunity to be included. So it's a great inclusive way to participate. And I think, when we take a chance and try to learn something new, we can often surprise ourselves with what we can do.
Absolutely, absolutely. The great reflections. What would you say? What are the leadership traits do you think society rewards most? Cheryl, I'm gonna bounce this to you first. Is there anything in particular to think as a society as a whole that we tend to reward or put on a pedestal more than others in terms of our traits for our leaders?
That's a good question. I think, especially in today's times, like we're in times of COVID, I think employers overall are in need of and celebrate the ability to innovate, to look beyond what's happening right now, and to reinvent so that we can continue to be sustainable in the future. I came in my prior life before coming to Habitat, I was in the hospitality space. And so that arena is being hit pretty significantly from COVID because people just aren't checking into hotels or, traveling as much. And so it requires us to be innovative and creative about if we want to be sustainable, what do we need to do next in order to appeal to our audience? And so I think those are the traits right now that employers are in need of, is someone who can think outside of the box. And I will tell you, I am a strong product of having a great mentor. And so one of the things early on, and my mentor does not look like me. And so if we have an opportunity later, we'll talk about how to find a mentor. But my mentor, one of the first things that my mentor really imparted in me is that the ability to not be a one-hit wonder, is that I have to be curious. Once I master something, don't stop there. And so that will allow your career to live longer. And so especially now we're seeing that, many businesses are impacted because the one thing that they did well isn't possible right now. And so where do you go from here? So I think employers right now are looking for someone that can think beyond today. So I think that's something that's being applauded and something that's needed right now.
Beth, what about you?
I do think COVID's had a real impact and made it more important than ever. Also for leaders, effective leaders in the workplace, to be able to express an understanding of what their colleagues are experiencing. And really, people vote more than ever with their feet nowadays in the workplace. They can leave more than ever in my career. And so having good leadership matters. And I think that more than ever, knowing that your leader cares about you and your success is important, and being able to communicate that.
That's great. Jessie?
Yeah, I think definitely kind of to talk about the pandemic a little bit and getting through all that is just resilience, right? You gotta, like Cheryl said, you kind of gotta be innovative. You gotta figure out a different way to do your job and still get stuff done. So like with Habitat, right, we are having to definitely be resilient in that respect. We don't want what we are doing here to impact our families in a negative way. So we have to figure out a way to hit our goals and still hit our COs and get families moved in as quickly and as safely as we can. Because if we don't, build a particular number of homes that we have set for us for this year, that's impacting a family directly who's living in an insecure situation. So we want to make sure that you're working through that we are encouraging our team to do the problem solving. And when someone tells you, no, we can't do it this way, or no, you're going to fail that inspection, you got to figure out how to get around that and really work together as a team. And I got to make sure that I'm supporting my team and giving them all the resources I possibly can to allow them to problem solve that sort of stuff out. So.
Cheryl, you brought up an interesting point about leadership traits that I think, this pandemic especially, that you all have reflected on, have really kind of bubbled those traits to the top, right? If folks naturally have them, they've had to put them on display. And then folks who have not honed their leadership skills in empathy and vulnerability and, being able to be nimble is a word we use a lot, to be able to pivot, it's a word I'd be happy to leave in 2020 if we can. Thinking about kind of some of those leadership traits, I think a lot of those things pre-pandemic or often went unappreciated, right? If you're on the for-profit side, it's likely things that are going to set you and the organization you work for apart from a business standpoint and the ROI on the work that you do. And from a nonprofit standpoint, it's really about who is helping kind of lead the mission. But I'm curious to know from each of you, are there traits that should be considered or more prioritized as leadership traits, but often go unappreciated, like vulnerability, like the ability to be empathetic to one another and to the world around us, especially in light of this pandemic? Have we finally come around to this idea that leaders need to have some of those softer leadership skills? Beth, what do you think?
Yeah, I think we were already there or getting there, but I completely agree that it's important. And there's a real blurring in COVID of, I've seen more of my colleagues' pets, children, personal lives, perhaps sometimes more than we intend. So I think absolutely being real and recognizing the struggle, and there have been clear struggles for folks, and being able to acknowledge that and still, help focus and be resilient and pivot. I too am tired of that word, and move forward together. I think.
Absolutely. Jessie, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I definitely think those soft skills, particularly during this time, are being utilized a lot more. We, as leaders, we have to be really humble, and we have to be able to communicate to our team really well and just be transparent. I know that when we were back when everything kind of first happened in the summer, and we were having to no longer, use volunteers for a little bit, we were still trying to figure out how to get home buyers out on our sites as quickly as possible in our force of habitat, which are those regular volunteers. And so we didn't just make a decision and say, hey, these are the new protocols we're following. Now you're going to get this many people and I'll go figure it out in the field, go get houses built. We sat our team down and we had these conversations, said, what are you going to be comfortable with? What do you feel like how can we support you basically to get your jobs done, and make you feel safe and comfortable on sites? And so it was a back and forth conversation. I think that particularly during this time that is needed, but it was always there. It was always a huge leadership skill that needed to be honed in on by your leadership. But definitely kind of the humbleness and knowing that you don't have to know everything, right? I don't have to know every single thing about construction because I have others in my office to lean on. I have Brad, I have Patrick, I have Ellie, I have all of our superintendents. It's just that back and forth conversation of listening, really.
That's great. Cheryl?
Yes, I think to Beth's point, I think we've been there at the point where we should celebrate more the quote unquote soft skills. I think in the past, some of those more aggressive communication styles, kind of bull in the china shop, I think that had its place and it was applauded because the short of it, it was getting results, it was getting things done. And so the bottom line, especially for for-profit spaces where I've spent most of my career, is about, are you able to drive results? And so I think what employers discovered over that time is that for that person that was a bull in the china shop, the impact that they had on other talent in the organization was such a risk, right? Because people leave, they don't want to work with someone like that because it's very difficult to. And so I think we've seen just several years that there is a need to focus on traits like emotional intelligence, helping leaders understand themselves more. And so, because the idea is that the more you understand about yourself and what impacts you and how you communicate, then you can understand better how you project that on other people, whether they're your peers or teams that you lead. And so what I've seen in the HR space is that a number of organizations turning to, okay, train us now how to be more emotionally intelligent. Tons of books out there published, over the past few years about how can we understand ourselves more, because I think more and more we're realizing that true leadership has to start from a personal accountability, and then it works outward. But we all have to start with ourselves. And so it's time now that we identify and work from that space if we're going to be really strong, viable organizations going forward. Because I think someone said it, and I'm going to have to steal that quote, people vote with their feet now more than ever. And so when they're not having a great experience, they'll leave. And so, you know, sometimes, you know, that's appreciated, right? You can appreciate that someone is able to make that choice, but what happens when your top talent leaves? You really don't want that. So from a retention standpoint, it's certainly something that we should be paying attention to more.
Absolutely. Before I ask the next question of you all, I just want to remind our viewers that are watching on Facebook, if they have any questions, we'll have a couple minutes at the end for a little bit of Q&A. They can pop their questions in the Facebook comments, and we will try to get to as many of them as possible before we wrap everything up today. So Jessie, you mentioned this in terms of your transition from starting with Habitat into your role now, you know, starting from working in AmeriCorps and now moving all the way up to being the director of construction. And Beth, you reflected a little bit on this in terms of, you know, your upbringing, you know, learning kind of how to do these things like hammer nails and such. You know, I think about a lot of those experiences that we talked about, similar to how, you know, Cheryl mentioned earlier as well, that you know, we often don't have the opportunity or the experiences that we are in need of to step into those leadership roles, or we are not necessarily given the challenges or the obstacles that we can face and then say we have this experience, and that will allow us to transition into a role with more leadership opportunities. So I'm curious from the three of you, you know, kind of what challenges, what obstacles, what friction points you all have faced as you've kind of transitioned role to role, and if you'd be willing to share an anecdote or a real life example with those who are listening. So Jessie, I'm gonna bring it back to you.
Sure. Awesome. Well, I did read the questions you sent beforehand, so I was thinking about this one a little bit, so I had some time to prepare.
Yes, to tell anybody.
I'll bring it back to kind of what we kind of started off with like the confidence thing. For me, that was probably my biggest struggle, was just confidence. I mean, I came in with a couple knocks against me, having had a zoology degree, not even, you know, project management or anything. I was young coming into this position, on speaking about a superintendent position, and I was female. And so I had those kind of insecurities to myself, but as Pat has always told me, you gotta fake it till you make it. And so like I can say that to you guys, right, because we're all friends here, and like, you know, there's that mutual respect. But to people in maybe the for-profit world that we dealt with, builders, or maybe to inspectors, I would definitely try to do my research beforehand, make sure I was asking the correct questions, make sure that I had my houses up to par with the code and stuff before they got there, and do that nitty-gritty research. But to do all that, once again, you definitely lean on people who have more experience than you, and it is that two-way street. And so my little anecdote there was thinking back to the Crosstown days, whenever I was out there working with Patrick, who many of you probably know. He came here with just framing experience. He'd been doing it for 50 to maybe even 100 years. I mean, Patrick's been doing it forever. And I had the experience of volunteer management. I was getting pretty good at the project management stuff, and just organization. And so we were able to, you know, cross those things together. And I was able to learn my construction skills from him, and he was able to learn the other skills from me. And it just worked out really well. And now we, you know, years later, we're both in the office and a part of the leadership team together. And so I think that, you know, when you find, to speak to kind of what Cheryl said, like a mentor or someone you can always look to bounce ideas off of, where there is that mutual respect, you know, you're going to be better at your job, but you're also making them better at their job as well. And so that's been really awesome for me. Yeah, so.
The zoology degree must have been a really fun conversation when you started.
I'd like to bring that up.
Cheryl, what are your thoughts?
Repeat the question again, I'm sorry.
Sure, no, so, you know, what kind of challenges or obstacles or friction points have you faced as you've transitioned throughout all of your professional roles? And, you know, do you have an anecdote you'd be willing to share with us?
Just one, huh?
I mean, so if we had a couple more hours, I'd say we could do, you know, get all of the stories.
Yeah, so I will tell you honestly, I've faced a lot of challenges, but I think those challenges have made me so much stronger. But one that kind of bubbles up to the top that I'll share is being an introvert. I am a major introvert. People are really surprised when I say that. There are scales of introvert if you've ever taken like Myers-Briggs or Mergenetics. And so I'm pretty low in terms of introversion. And so people are really surprised because in my role, especially in HR, I have to be very outgoing. I have to get up and you know, a lot of times be the first person at the front of the room. And so how do you do that? Well, I had to learn how to do that through a great mentor. I think being an introvert has been grossly undervalued because people think that introversion is about being shy or being hesitant or nervous, and it's really not about any of those things. Being an introvert is really just where you get your energy from. And so I re-energize myself in a quiet space so that I can go out and do what I need to do. But I think over the years, my being an introvert has really been called out more than I've liked. Because I'm usually the one in the room. I'm thinking, I'm listening, I'm taking notes, and then when I have something to say, I'll say it. But I'm thinking about it first because I've never been a person that really talks for the sake of it. I want to make sure that I'm very thoughtful when I do speak up. And so there have been many times where in a large space where everyone is speaking and I'm not, it stands out like a sore thumb. And then usually someone will say, "Are you okay? Are you all right? You know, what's going on?" And I'm like, "No, I'm fine. I'm really connected to the conversation." And then when I do say something, you know, the room's like, "Whoa, you know, well, I've been thinking about it," right? And so I think that's been undervalued. And so it's also something that I've undervalued in myself because, you know, when people mention something and they remark on something so often, it can create kind of a complex, right? So, you know, you go to the next event and you're like, "Oh my goodness, I've got to get my small talk together. I've got to make sure that I'm ready, you know, to really engage so that people won't be so distracted by my silence." But I will tell you where I am today in my career. I appreciate being an introvert and being someone that's quiet and thoughtful, because I know that when it's time to say something or when I have something to add to the conversation, I most certainly will. And I don't allow that pressure to really push me into a space where I don't desire to go. But it really took me just more greater confidence in my own leadership style to really be comfortable with being an introvert.
Absolutely. I think we definitely as a society, undervalue our introverted colleagues, and certainly we all have power, right, in the different ways, whether extroverted or introverted. And I'm going to watch out for whenever you and I are in a meeting and you're very quiet because I know something's about to come out. Beth, what about you?
Well, I really like those points from Jessie and Cheryl, and knowing yourself and your strengths. I would just build on what Cheryl mentioned. I think getting increasing leadership responsibilities at times, I would definitely have too many professional responsibilities, too many personal and family responsibilities, and then civic and church for me related responsibilities that were important to me. And it would be a real struggle, and too many times not having sufficient awareness of that in my career, you know, all of them very good things. And so what would give, I would default to me giving my well-being, my taking care of myself. And, you know, if you really can't show up as your best self in any of those roles, you know, I don't enjoy that as much. So being aware of that, being figuring out at times of all these great opportunities, you know, what are the things that are essential for me to do? What can someone else do, whether it's at work, whether it's at home, or in one of our activities? And then really being able to be reflective about that when assuming responsibilities, and then do them really, really well. I do think that's a bit of a silver lining of COVID. It's decluttered our calendars. It's certainly done that and allowed greater focus, and maybe some of the activities we've been engaged in, we recognize, whether at work or elsewhere, aren't as critical to the end product. We can get to a same or similar point without them. But I think that's been a challenge in various roles that I've had, trying to, some people call it balance, and maybe that's what it is, but I don't know. I'm not sure in my life, especially when my children were around, that balance is really an achievable goal. But certainly thoughtful and reflective management of them. So
yes, Beth, I think you and I are kindred spirits, because I feel the same way about balance. I don't know necessarily if balance should be the goal versus boundary, because I think the things that overwhelm us is that we take on so much, and we keep saying yes. We continue to say yes, yes, yes. And I think that is something that you see in a lot of women. We say yes, 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 because we think that being a leader means that we have to take it on. And it's not a leader if we say, no, I can't fit that in, and can we talk about a better time, that we think that that reflects negatively on us. But a burned out leader is not a good thing. So I think boundaries, and establishing those boundaries and communicating about our capacity is way more better for us personally, and as well as for the organization, versus attempting balance, because balance, I don't think, is really achievable. When it's time to go all in, you should, and guess what? You should be equally as committed to when it's time to vacation or to take off. You should be committed there as well. So yeah.
The words from Cheryl: when we go on PTO, we are on PTO. That is it.
As you should be.
As we should be. I love it. Well, and Beth, you made I was thinking about your reflection on both your professional commitments, but also your personal commitments, whether it's being involved in a church, whether it's being involved in your community. And so, I think it's safe to say that in this space right now, all four of us are clearly very big proponents of being involved in our communities. For a handful of us, it is literally it is our jobs, but I think that always carries over into our personal lives. It's hard not to when you do the work that we do. And so I'm curious to know from each of you, how critical do you feel it is for any leader to be outward and vocal and showing their support of an organization with their community. And Beth, in your case, obviously being a part of our board of directors is a very clear indication that this is an organization that means a lot to you. So I'm curious to know, kind of between the three of you, how you reflect and think, if I'm looking at somebody who's a leader, I want to know what matters to them within the community that they're a part of. So Beth, I'm gonna ask you to pick up that question first.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I've always regarded it or found it to be my responsibility to make my community better, the community that I'm a part of. I believe we're all connected. So many of my partners are serving in innumerable ways in the community. I think that's a belief that we hold. For me, it's just a value. It is, and I think as a business, I still think it makes complete sense for us. We want to have a wonderful community to attract talent, to live in. And I think there's the whole value statement for me about being connected to each other, and a recognition that we're all connected in the greater community. And, there's some powerful stories in Habitat of the impact that Habitat has on people's lives. And I think that that's absolutely important to share at our workplaces, and the work that so many of our colleagues are doing in a variety of ways to make the community better. So I think that makes for a better workplace as well as a place to live.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Jessie, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with Beth in that it definitely makes for a better work environment. we have a pretty big Habitat family here, and I like to think that our construction team in particular is very close-knit. We actually even have a outside volleyball league in that about 12 of us play in, which has been really fun and kind of been some team building, kind of been some headbutting. But it was awesome just to see people outside of work, right, and a little more relaxed, not thinking about work, and really get to know your colleagues that way. But I think as leaders, you just can never forget people. Obviously, you know, they look up to you in that leadership role, and the things that you say and the things that you do and the way that you carry yourself is very influential, good or bad. And so I think that you have to try and make that as positive as possible, obviously. And so I know one thing that we did recently too was a kind of a Toys for Tots kind of thing, but the Durham's doing that, but it was an angel tree thing where we had went out and bought some gifts for kids in foster care, and it was actually through a church that Rick, our faith relations director, actually got us in contact with. So that was really cool there, just to kind of not focus on just the job, but focus on another organization outside of us that we could also get back to and help. Because so many of those organizations, you know, sponsor the things that we're doing and sponsor the homes that we're building. So it's really good to have that two-way street and be able to give back as well. So I think it's very important.
Yeah.
Cheryl, what are your thoughts?
You know, I wholeheartedly agree with what's been said already. I think from an organizational standpoint, I think we would do ourselves a great service to celebrate the total person that our employees bring to the table. And so that includes what they do for the affiliate and the things that are of interest to them outside of here, because what you do outside of here is really what energizes you when you're at work. And so I think to applaud that and support that as an organization is important. I also think, and Jessie, what she said was dear to my heart, is someone who's a leadership coach, that, you know, leaders model right or wrong behaviors. And so when leaders are expressive about the things that they support outside of work and that they give time to that as well, I think their employees and the teams that they lead follow suit. And so it's important to model, you know, nurturing those things that are important to you so that you can, you know, show up for work in a more sound, emotional and rested in a physical way so that you can do the job that you get paid for. I think that that's important to demonstrate.
Absolutely. This has been, I feel like we could have this conversation for hours, and we probably are going to have a part 2 discussion for sure. But I wanted to make sure we gave a little bit of time for some Q&A from some of our viewers out there. So in particular, this is a very interesting question, and it's for you, Cheryl, but I think that both Beth and Jessie could also have some input here. And it's interesting to reflect kind of on the boundaries piece that you were talking earlier. So the question is, how do you keep your cup filled as a leader when you're doing work in the social sector and expected to leverage it into profit? In particular, this question is really focused about self-care. And I think it kind of goes back to what you're saying earlier about boundaries. And especially as women, you know, we say yes to everything because we think that's going to make us better leaders. But in particular, in the work that we do here at Habitat, you know, how do you keep that cup filled when you're expected to do both? So we'll start with you, Cheryl, since it was directed at you. And
so I'll answer it by starting with a story. So in 2006, I think, the recession, was that 2006? I was working for a large employer, and I was working, it felt like round the clock, early mornings, late nights. It was part of a startup. So we were doing a lot of building new processes and policies and all this great stuff. And so I was a new manager, at that size of an organization. And so I was all in. A year later, because of the recession, I was laid off and given a severance package. And I didn't want the severance package, I wanted the job. And so what I learned from that is all the time that I had put in, that I had taken away from my family, none of that was a factor when, you know, I was severed, right? It's a business decision, it's not personal. And so what I learned for me personally as a budding professional is that I need to make sure that I'm making some space for myself and my family, that I'm a workhorse. I work really hard. I don't mind putting in the hours. I love a great project, and those things really, I have a strong internal drive, but also what I've learned for myself is that I must make time to turn it off. Because if I don't, there is a point, and maybe it's further down the line, but there is a point where I'm really burned out and exhausted. And so I've been there before. And so I have learned to identify way before I get to the point of exhaustion that no, I need to have some time where I step away. I hesitate, I don't use the word balance, because when it's time to work, I'm all in. But I also make sure that I'm equally as committed to shutting it off. Because sometimes as a professional, especially early on in my management career, I thought that this will absolutely fail if I don't hold it up. And so what I learned is that that's not true, is that the work will be there when I come back to work, right? And so it doesn't take away from me as a leader to step away and to put the work down and spend some time with my family. And so I do that. I also have a daily ritual. I'm a very prayerful person. My faith is very important to me. And so those are the things that help me prepare my mind for the day. And then once I'm home, I do carve out time where I shut work off. I plug into the most important things to my life, and then I go back to work when it's necessary. So, but I had to learn that.
Absolutely. And I think that is definitely something that, anyone who is starting a job or, whether they're fresh out of college or, especially during this time where, there are high rates of unemployment, that folks are looking for, new roles, new opportunities, or just an opportunity, that idea that, it is okay to set those boundaries, that burnout is, if it's imminent, you've got to kind of pay attention to it. But it's hard, right? It's hard because you don't want to seem like you're not committed to your role, you're not committed to the organization or to the job. And so I think it's refreshing to hear that from somebody in a leadership position, to acknowledge that need from personal reflection of setting those boundaries.
And if I could add in one more nugget about
Sure.
the difficulty of, like, how do you make that happen? So say you're in a space where you're like, I don't even know, how do I set those boundaries? Well, it's through communication. So whenever I'm given a task, I always ask, when do you need it? When is it due? That helps me to prioritize when the assignment is given to me. I think a lot of times we assume that our leaders want it right now, and sometimes they do want it now. But is everything due now? It's probably not. And so that's where some really strong communication comes in to say, hey, because sometimes, the leaders may not know everything that's on your plate. And so it's up to us to tell them that. Well, here are some things that I'm currently working on. Where does what you're wanting from me additionally fall into, priority? And that helps me so that then I can move forward, and then I can make sure that I'm still carving time out for me that I need, but I'm also staying on task with those deadlines. You just have to have that strong communication.
Absolutely. Beth, what are your thoughts?
Well, I too agree with what Cheryl was saying. I might add a practical tip in addition to kind of that time that you pull away. I've heard once a story where a leader had in their contacts a D or an F by all their contacts. And D was that person drains them, and F, that person fills them up. And they instructed their assistant that they could only have so many of the D's in any day. And I have built on that calendar management idea, and really putting ourselves in control of our day to the extent possible. We don't know what's going to happen, but to manage your reserve, your emotional reserve, to have that self-awareness, I think over time we'll all come to different skills, or I'd encourage us to manage that. But that can really make us more effective, in addition to managing things outside of work.
I love that idea. D's and F's. I would put F's next to all of you. You are all filling my cup.
Yes. So I think that it'd be really hard for me to speak too much more on that subject that Cheryl and Beth just covered so well. But I think I can speak maybe a little bit to just not only setting aside that time for yourself, but also setting aside that time for your team as a whole. I think that's really important as well, to monitor your team's well-being and where their mindset is. And so throughout the year, we as leaders are responsible for that, right? And so we definitely try to set aside that time, no matter what's going on in the schedule, no matter what inspections are coming up that day. We definitely set aside around Thanksgiving a Tuesday morning for all of us to come in and have breakfast together as a team. Call it breakfast giving. And I have to give kudos to our old decon team. They actually coined the term, but we've carried on that tradition for at least 5 years now. And so we used to potluck it all in. Everybody brings their own dish, and that was really neat for us. This year was a little different, in that we had to go ahead and get some like pre-wrapped stuff because of COVID. But that's a really special time that I always look forward to sharing with our team. We get here, Patrick and Ellie and I get here like 5 in the morning to decorate for it. So it's like really fun. And same thing kind of around Christmas, right? Keep on like the white elephant tradition there. So I think that just little things like that throughout the year that that we can look forward to as leaders, and that we can tell to our team to look forward to as well. I think that's really important to also set aside, and that helps me in my personal, my personal health, like Cheryl was kind of talking about, just setting aside that time. I'm still at work, I'm still with my team, but I'm not focused on work. And so that really is something that I enjoy.
Wonderful. Well, we have time for one last question. So, so this is from Sean. He asks, how can men be better allies to their female colleagues? And to Cheryl, what you referenced earlier, how can a male colleague be a better and always respectful mentor in the workplace to a female colleague? So Cheryl, I'm going to have you answer this one first, since that was very directed at you.
So my mentor is a man, and he actually selected me as someone to mentor. And so I was very appreciative of that, that he saw something in me, that he really wanted to just kind of speak to. And so I will tell you he would just ask a lot of questions. He didn't make any assumptions based off of my gender. Because I think he would have gone wrong, because, not every trait is common to every woman or every man, right? So he didn't make any assumptions. And so he asked a lot of questions, and he had a curiosity around wanting to know how I articulated what I needed. And so I would say that for men who work with women, don't make assumptions, right? Just if you don't know something, don't assume, even if it looks familiar from a male counterpart, ask the question. And I think in most cases, we would be very happy to tell you honestly what it is, versus when you guess, then, there's a chance of getting it wrong, and then that can damage relationships. So be very curious and ask questions. And then once you become aware of the answer, develop an empathy for it. Don't, take it to heart if someone takes an opportunity to really share with you their thoughts. And then you decide how can you employ that in other times where you may work together or work projects or do whatever together. Just make sure you take that feedback of whatever they share with you to heart.
That's great. Jessie, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think that you can try and take gender out of the equation a little bit, right? Just like, this is so-and-so, this is their role. So what you can assume is that they know how to do their role, and then just the conversation kind of goes from there, I guess. Yeah, that's a tough one. I was thinking about that, but I think Cheryl said it very well.
Great. Beth, what about you?
Maybe one other thing is just to, you could people can act as interrupters to that kind of biased or assumptive thinking. I think that that's a really effective way, whether the woman or anyone is there and hearing that, or not there. There's a good opportunity to intervene and kind of point out not everyone's the same. And to step up and to help in that way. And sometimes it can be done in a way that is less awkward for the person to have to advocate for themselves. I'm not implying we all need a defender, but sometimes it's helpful to have a little, what I would call an interrupter of some biased thinking.
I love that. I love that. Well, before we wrap up, I would just love, to hear if any of you have any sort of parting words of inspiration or empowerment or motivation to those listening today, and encourage them if they are considering, stepping into a leadership role, or perhaps if they aren't, but they want to take on some more leadership qualities, what would you suggest? What's the pep talk that you would give? So Jessie, since I started with you, I'm gonna finish with you first.
Yeah, I'd say just go for it, right? Fake it till you make it. That's kind of how I got to where I am. I think that being humble, though, and understand that you don't have to know it all. No one does. You can do this job in particular for 80 years and you're not going to know it all. And that's okay. And so you do have to exude that confidence that I do know how to do my job well. But you also have to have that humbleness to be able to ask questions whenever you don't know the answer, and to lean on your own team. I mean, that's why we're all here. We all enjoy working with one another, but definitely have confidence and just go for it, really.
Yeah, that's great. Cheryl?
Yeah. I'll build on that because that was a really great thought. I would say find your authentic voice and own it. I think there are times as leaders that we see what works for another person and we may attempt to emulate that. And so it comes across disingenuous and it may not work for you, what someone else's style, right? Because it's not your own. But I am a huge proponent of showing up in a very authentic way. And so do that. If there's something that you need to work on, then work on it and fix it. But don't attempt to become a copycat of someone else. Be yourself and show up and do the work.
I love that. That's great. And Beth, finally, any thoughts?
Do what you love what you do.
Yes.
I love it. That's perfect. Cheryl, Jessie, Beth, thank you so much for your time today. This has been an immense pleasure to learn from you and to understand more about you as individuals and as leaders, as colleagues, as peers. I am very lucky that I get a chance to work with you, and we are lucky that we get to hear from you in this regard. Thank you for being your vulnerable, authentic selves, and for sharing this all with us. I am so grateful, and I know that the organization is grateful to you all too. So thank you all so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for the invite. It's a great discussion.
Thank you.
For those of you who are still listening, this will be the first of 3 of our Women Build Talks that we will be hosting. We will be doing 2 more in 2021, so stay tuned for those dates. Thank you so much for joining us, and hopefully we will see you out on the build sites soon. Thank you so much, everybody.